If you've ever created a new recipe, arranged furniture in a room, or planted a garden, you have designed something. Everyone, well, almost, has applied design thinking in some way. We have always had the skills to design. Some people do it naturally and don't even realise what they are doing. If you solve problems, you are doing design thinking. Using a design thinking process, you can encourage your team to challenge and improve ideas, reduce the risk of producing an ineffective solution, and ensure that the final deliverable will really work for the intended users. Everything around us is designed. However, there is a difference between invention and design. The person who decided to use a brush to clean their teeth was an inventor. The person who decided that it would be about 20 centimetres long, have shaped bristles and a flexible handle was a designer. It has only been in relatively recent times that researchers have come to understand the process of design. Designing is a highly intelligent process of combining tacit knowledge with deep cognitive skills. It requires abductive thinking, which is very different to the more common understanding of deductive and inductive reasoning. It is the ability to shift thinking from the purpose or function of a task to tools or products to assist with the function to achieve those tasks. This requires the ability to see the world and its problems from a variety of different angles. It is not unlike the ability to see two different images in the one drawn picture. Here you can either see the outline of a young woman with her face turned away, or alternatively, an old woman looking down. In this image, known as Rubens' vase, you can see the outline of a white vase, or two figures in profile looking at one another. Good design thinking teams often have to work with and be comfortable with ambiguity, and to try and see the problem from multiple perspectives. To understand this style of thinking, Davies and Talbot conducted interviews with designers about how and what they do. They discovered that designers dealt constructively with uncertainty and were open to all kinds of experiences, particularly those relevant to their design problem. They are sensitive to patterns and consider the rhythms of the events and the people who interact in their problem space when thinking through an issue. They are also quite prepared to test what might seem as radical, or in some cases ridiculous, ideas to see what can be learned and applied. For example, everyone will have heard of Da Vinci's famous inventions. These sketches show ideas that may have seemed ridiculous or nonsensical at the time. Yet these designs evolved into real machines that we now take for granted. Importantly, solutions do not just present themselves. This is a fallacy that has been perpetuated by highly talented or experienced designers who appear to just create solutions out of thin air. Design thinking is not magic. There is a process which, when followed, will provide you with solutions that may seem fantastic, but are really just the result of a complex thinking process happening out of sight. Design thinking is also used to identify, diagnose and deconstruct problems. Surely that means anyone who has experienced a problem should be able to define and describe it, right? How can you not know what the problem is when you're experiencing it? Well, people usually only experience the symptoms of a problem. It actually requires experienced problem solvers to identify and resolve an issue. It is only through exploration of the problem that the real requirements can be found. As an example, I recently experienced a problem with our internet service. After months of wrangling with the service provider, purchasing a new modem and replacing all of the range extenders in our house, we were still experiencing the same inconsistent and often very poor internet connection. It took an expert to finally realise that the problem was not due to our service or hardware, but rather because of an old connection that had not been capped properly, and the hot, humid air flowing through our ceiling kept short-circuiting the connection. In this example, the poor internet service was the symptom, but it took an expert with problem-solving skills to identify the real issue. This is really the first step for design, knowing what and where the real problem lies and finding out what is really creating the issue. Being able to identify and treat the cause, rather than the symptoms, is a part of good design. Great design teams are also able to simultaneously consider multiple thoughts or streams of interacting problems and solutions. Design teams run various scenarios, testing an idea in different mind's eye or virtual scenarios in order to understand the impact. Experimentation and testing begins at the inception of an idea or identification of a problem. To illustrate this, let's look at the case of a lemon juicer called the Juicy Salif, which is now almost an iconic symbol of design and the magic and creativity of what designers do. Once you understand the process of generating ideas and finding solutions, the process is less magical and more logical. In this case, it was a simple problem that was already well defined and already had many solutions. There were many traditional juices already on the market. How do you improve on the design of a juicer for citrus fruit? Or how do you create something that is functional but also beautiful? Citrus requires some form of compression to squeeze the juice out of the fruit. Lemons, oranges and other citrus are roughly the same size and shape, requiring the same mechanism. There were certain implicit design constraints. It should have minimal moving parts, be cheap to manufacture and attractive. As the story goes, Philippe was sitting in a cafe ordering lunch on holidays when he began sketching his ideas for the brief that he had been given for a lessee. He started with a rather traditional idea, redrawing and adding or adjusting components. And around about this time, the waiter arrived with his lunch, which was squid. He started incorporating its bizarre shape into his design, also incorporating his previous experience and fascination with science fiction and space travel. These things combined for the first draft idea for the juicer. With materials sourced and his design prototype, Philippe saw his play transformed into reality and then further refined in the testing process. How does this design process work more formally within an organisational group? How do you get your team to innovate in this way? You will hear many people talk about design methods or a design process. These are frameworks to guide the team, helping them determine the right tools or techniques that can assist in developing a solution. There are many different models for this process, some of which are themselves now commercialised products that your organisation can adopt for implementation. All of them describe basically the same iterative process where the team moves from a process of divergent idea generation then to convergent or narrowing of ideas. These processes combine to create a practical solution that can be tested and built on. Unfortunately, team creativity is blocked by a number of factors that we've learned or inherited. These factors include perceptual blocks, emotional blocks, associational blocks, cultural blocks, professional blocks, intellectual blocks, environmental blocks. Teams use design thinking techniques to overcome these inhibiting factors. Although the full range of techniques and processes for design is beyond a single video, it is worth introducing the fundamental and most useful skills in design thinking. These are for generating possible ideas for a solution based on a problem. I say possible ideas because it's important to recognise that it's unlikely, if not impossible, that anyone will come up with a final design solution the first time that they start generating ideas. Each idea is just one step towards a better solution. Some ideas may be incremental, but the next idea may contain the leap that is needed to really change direction and solve a previously unsolved problem. This part of the process involves divergent thinking. I like to visualise this as the left-hand side of a diamond. Once the team understands the problem, they begin to generate ideas that can address some part of the issue. So, from a single point or problem, the team must start to think more broadly, being open to alternative ideas, some that might seem unrelated, but may stimulate different directions in thinking. As a team leader, divergent thinking requires getting your team to open their minds to new possibilities, trying to broaden their understanding of the scope and framing of the problem. How can we look at the problem differently? This is where the team diversity really helps. No single person has all of the ideas. Different perspectives provide different solutions, and only together can the best integrative solution be found. Brainstorming is often utilised during the divergent idea generation process. It can be underrated, but it is an incredibly valuable part of exploring and generating ideas for possible solutions. Unfortunately, our brain often wants to criticise and curb ideas. Doing brainstorming requires a conscious action to press pause on that judgment. As a leader, you need to encourage your team and yourself to consciously reserve your judgment during this process, trying not to diminish others' ideas, but finding something to add. This is a process of uncovering and building, rather than reduction and elimination. Next is the right-hand side of the diamond, representing convergent thinking. Once the team has an exhaustive list of creative ideas, they can begin eliminating and combining those ideas further. When your team has the ingredients for creativity, using this process of first divergent and then convergent thinking, you can unlock innovation in your team. Done well, with openness and a lack of judgment, brainstorming can be the launchpad for great ideas. It assists in breaking down the problem into manageable chunks and developing possible ideas that can be used as a starting point for bigger solutions. This process is important because there is no one right answer. There are many ways to solve a problem. There may be many designs that will work. Once the ideas are out, only then can the team identify what will work best within the constraints of the brief. Then, at some point in the process, the decision must be made to begin reducing ideas and narrowing down on a solution. This convergent thinking occurs later in the design process. Consider combining the idea of a car ride company, an app to order your ride, and ride sharing. This bizarre collection of concepts evolved into what is known iconically as Uber. Further combinations of ideas resulted in Uber Eats as a next generation of evolution of the design. Taking two ideas and mashing them together may have unexpected results. Sometimes they're amusing and nonsensical, but sometimes they can lead to the generation of new ideas. Who would have thought that we would combine a watch with a phone, except in a spy or science fiction movie? Now we have smartwatches. What about a flying vehicle for regular transport? Something from science fiction. Take a drone and combine it with a motorbike, and these are now being used by police in Dubai. These are the sorts of ideas that might seem crazy at first, but may lead to something truly remarkable. They are all great examples of using design thinking process to challenge and improve ideas, reduce the risk of producing an ineffective solution, and ensure that the final deliverable will really work for the intended users.